Hello everyone and welcome to today's video. Today I have another 2026 Senate elections video for you. In this one, I've taken the 2026 Senate map and I've taken all the states that are either considered to be toss-up states or lean states, states that I expect will be under 5% on the margin of victory or right around that threshold. For instance, a state like Iowa that I have slightly above 5%, I put it into that category. New Hampshire's in a similar boat where it could be more than 5, could be under 5, so I added that in there. But for today's video, I want to shine a spotlight on a few Senate races that I don't expect the Republicans to lose or the Democrats to win, but I do think, given this election environment, it's possible they could get more competitive than perhaps they otherwise would be, and I want to shine a light on some of these Senate races. So the first one I'm going to do is the state of South Carolina. Now, South Carolina, this is an interesting Senate race as this is Republican U.S. Senator Lindsey Graham. Now, Graham is running for re-election. He is facing off against several Republicans in the Republican primary, but President Trump has enthusiastically endorsed him several times now, and he's going to be the Republican nominee for this race. On the Democratic side, the most notable Democrat that's running, there's Annie Andrews, Brandon Brown, Catherine Fleming Bruce, the U.S. candidate from 2022 as a write-in. We'll have to wait and see how that primary ends up going, but Annie Andrews has the clearest advantage right now on money and cash on hand. As for the general election, the polling and the predictions on this one are telling two pretty different stories. The predictions for inside elections and race to the White House have it as likely for the Republicans, whereas Cook Political Report and Sourdough Crystal Ball have it as solid Republican. Now, there's only been two polls conducted in this race for Graham versus Andrews, and both of which are Democratic polling firms. So they're going to make the Democratic candidate most likely look better than they ultimately end up doing, as that's kind of the main objective of these polling firms. But still, it shows Lindsey Graham at 47%, Annie Andrews 42%, with 11% undecided. In public policy polling, it's Graham at 42%, Annie Andrews 36%, and 22% undecided. So what does this mean? Does this mean on Election Day 2026, when all the votes are cast, Lindsey Graham's only winning South Carolina by 5 points? No, absolutely not. Again, it's a Democratic polling firm. It's making the Democrats look better. It's making the Republican look worse. But still, it is interesting Senate race given the context of Graham's last race, where if you go back to 2020, Lindsey Graham won against the Democrat Jamie Harrison by 10.3%. Roughly, when you look at the overall vote numbers here, roughly a difference of about 250,000 votes in this Senate race, which for South Carolina is actually pretty competitive, given that Tim Scott on the same, or not on the same ballot, but, oh no, it was the same ballot, I'm sorry, won by 23.6 in 2016. And we can look, I believe it was in 2022, where Tim Scott ran for a full term. He won by 25.9%. So Lindsey Graham's popularity or lack of popularity opens up the door for South Carolina to be a little bit more competitive in 2026. I don't think it's going to be a state the Democrats have a chance at winning, but at very least it's a state that could fall under that 15% margin of victory that would make it a safe win. So South Carolina is an interesting one I wanted to point out. The next is the state of Florida. Florida is an interesting one as well, due to the fact that Florida in 2024 was not seen as a competitive state for the first time really in a long time. Now, it's a special Senate race that's up as Marco Rubio, the former U.S. Senator, is now President Trump's Secretary of State. The Attorney General at the time, Ashley Moody, was appointed to be the interim U.S. Senator, and she is now running for a full term in this race. And she has the endorsement of President Trump, several notable Florida Republicans. She'll be the Republican nominee. On the Democrat side, there are several Democrats that are running in this race. Alan Grayson, Alex Vindman, Angie Nixon are the most notable running in this race. The polling still remains to be seen how that's going to shake out, but Alex Vindman is leading with the money advantage right now. As for the general election on this one, it's a similar story. Inside elections and Cook Political Report have it listed as solid for the Republicans. Sourdough Crystal Ball has it as likely. Race to the White House has it as lean. Now, the difference here, though, is we do have a few polls from more well-known polling sources. So Stetson University and Emerson College and University of North Florida have polls for Ashley Moody versus Angie Nixon. And in these polls, Moody's winning by a very solid amount, 51 to 38, 47 to 36. over double-digit leads in both instances. For Ashley Moody versus Alex Vindman, it's a little bit more competitive. 49 to 47, or 49 to 42, a 7-point lead for the Stetson University poll. For Moody, Emerson's College was 46 to 38, roughly about an 8-point lead in that one. Then you also have two Democratic pollsters showing it to be around a 3-point race and a 1-point race. Though again, Democratic poll making the Democrat look good, the Republican look bad. A Republican poll, Echelon Insights, which is usually a more favorable Republican one though, shows a 7-point lead for Moody. So if you do the inverse there, that might be propping Moody up a little bit as well. So this Senate race is an interesting one, with the polling matchup of Moody versus Vindman from both Stetson University and Emerson College and the University of North Florida. Yes, was still roughly about 10% of the vote undecided, shows it under 10 points right now, which would put it in that likely Republican category. So even though Florida is usually a very red state, in the 2024 Senate race, Rick Scott, the Republican senator, won re-election by 12.8%. I don't think we're going to see it return to like 2018 when Rick Scott defeated the Democratic incumbent by only 0.12%. And then in 2022, I believe it was Marco Rubio won by 16.4%. I don't know if we're going to see Florida get to 16.4 or maybe even 12.8 in 2026. It's possible it does, but we might see Florida go right around 10 points or even under 10 points for the first time in the last few election cycles. So Florida is another interesting one that I'm watching, but again, I don't think the Democrats are going to be able to win this race. I just think it's an interesting one where the margins could play an interesting role. Next, we have a Senate race in a state that's almost never talked about when it comes to being competitive, and that is the state of Mississippi. Now, Mississippi, a main reason this race is a target is the 2020 Senate race, where it was Republican Cindy Hyde-Smith versus the Democrat Espy. She won by roughly about 10 points, a similar margin to Lindsey Graham. Now, Mississippi at the presidential level, we can see here on the 2024 map, is a very red state. It voted for Donald Trump by 22.9%. So presidential-wise, it's not very competitive. But Senate-wise, may actually be a different story. And a new poll came out, does show that maybe this could be more competitive and similar to 2020 than, say, President Trump's massive win in 2024. Cindy Hyde-Smith, the U.S. Republican senator, is running for re-election again. On the Democratic side, Scott Collum, the district attorney for the 16th district, is the Democratic nominee. Two other Democrats were eliminated in the primary. As for third-party candidates, there is a third-party candidate, Ty Pinkins, who is the Democratic nominee for Secretary of State in 2023 and U.S. Senate in 2024. Now, the predictions for this one are all solid Republican for 3 out of the 4 of them. Rachel Whitehouse has it as likely Republican. But two recent polls, or one more recent poll, one was 25, one was 26. The April poll from Impact Research, which again is a very popular Democratic polling firm that's going to be on behalf of the Democratic candidate, that'll make the Republican look weaker. But it shows a very competitive race in the first poll. Cindy Hyde-Smith at 42, Scott Collum at 39, Ty Pinkins at 6. When it's just Hyde-Smith versus Collum, it's 47 to 44 with 9% undecided. Now again, you have to take this with a grain of salt, as Impact Research is a very notable Democratic polling firm, and it even says the poll was sponsored by SPLC Action Fund, who opposes Cindy Hyde-Smith. My rule of thumb for the last cycle for 2024 was that I would essentially shift the poll 5 points in the opposite direction when it was a biased poll for the Democrats or Republicans. It doesn't always 100% add up that way, but on average, I found a lot of polls ended up being about 5 points. But even still, let's hypothetically do that, shift that 5 points. That would still be about an 8-point lead for Hyde-Smith versus Scott Collum in Mississippi. Now, in a vacuum, you would say an 8-point lead in that Senate race. That sounds more like Iowa or Ohio or a state like, I don't know, maybe Georgia before it became a big toss-up state. That wouldn't sound like the state of Mississippi. But given Hyde-Smith's performance in the 2020 Senate election, this is a Senate race I think Republicans should at least keep an eye on. Due to Cindy Hyde-Smith underperforming in 2020, it's possible she may underperform again in 2026. So this is an interesting Senate race I'm watching as well. Again, don't think it's going to flip, but I'm keeping a close eye on it. One that I was skeptical to include on this list, but I'm going to include on this list, is the state of Kansas. Now, Kansas' Senate race isn't getting talked about too much, but there was a poll, again, most recently, that may have made this one seem more competitive. So this is Republican U.S. Senator Roger Marshall, and he'll be the Republican candidate. Obviously, he's the U.S. Senator. Several of the Democrats are running in this race. The Democrat that'd be most notable that can make this race competitive would be the U.S. Representative Sharice Davids of the 3rd District. Obviously, we'll have to wait and see if she announces a run or not. As for the general election, though, it's listed as solid Republican, but likely Republican from race to the White House. But the matchup of the Republican versus the Democrat doesn't actually seem to be in doubt too much. For Roger Marshall versus Noah Tyler, Marshall's leading by roughly about 10 points. For Roger Marshall versus Patrick Schmidt, Marshall's also leading by about 10 points. And again, this is a Democratic pollster, Tavern Research, so grain of salt, and it's from January as well. Shifting it 5 points in the direction of the Republican would be about a safe Republican win. But the independent candidate, Adam Hamilton, who is a pastor who is not officially running, he formed an exploratory committee, so that means he is entertaining a run for this. In that pollster, which may potentially be a sponsored poll of Hamilton, it shows Adam Hamilton leading 51-49, which is very, very interesting. Now it shows what Marshall versus Adam Hamilton would also look like if Hamilton ran as Democrat. And even still, in that poll, that was about a 10-point lead. Marshall's leading 54-46, roughly about an 8-point lead. So even though it is a Democratic or Adam Hamilton aligned pollster, it does show at very least the margins are under 15 points and that it might be considered more of a likely state than a safe state if Adam Hamilton decides to jump in. But if it's Marshall versus Noah Tyler or Patrick Schmidt, I think we'd see Marshall win by a safe margin. If Sharice Davids jumps in, this could be competitive. But Adam Hamilton versus Roger Marshall, I think for right now, it's nothing more than a shock poll that's trying to drum up interest in this race and a potential Adam Hamilton candidacy. And I would definitely keep an eye on it if he did enter this race to see if future polls and non-biased polls show this findings as well. But this is one that only one poll to go off of that is a biased poll, but an interesting matchup at least, to say the least there. So I wouldn't put it in solid Republican now in case Adam Hamilton does decide to run. But it's an interesting one nonetheless. Next, we have the state of Montana, where Montana, a similar one, involves an independent candidate. So Montana, this is Republican U.S. Senator Steve Daines. He is retiring, making it an open race. Typically, when an incumbent is not running and it's an open race, at least definitely at the governor level and the Senate level as well, it's a lot easier to win an election when there's not an incumbent running, as incumbents often have huge fundraising advantages and name ID advantages. So it's an open race. Now, Steve Daines handpicked candidate Kurt Alme due to some circumstances of, it says here that at 4:52 p.m., Alme filed a run. 3 minutes later, Steve Daines withdrew at 5:02 p.m. Or at 5:02 p.m., Daines announced his withdrawal, essentially locking up any possibility of a primary or other Democratic candidates like former Senator John Tesser from being able to run. Kind of a sneaky, controversial move by the Montana Republican senator. But regardless, Alme will be the Republican nominee. He has the endorsement of Daines, Tim Sheehy, and Donald Trump, and Governor Greg Gianforte as well. On the Democratic side, the Democrats do have several candidates running. The most notable candidate that I've seen from most polls and from most website articles is Riley Neal, the former state representative. But the main candidate to watch for in this race is Seth Bodnar, who is the former president of the University of Montana and is running as an independent candidate. Now, him being in this race has shifted this. It's now listed as likely Republican from 3 out of the 4 prediction websites. And with the polling that shows Daines versus Riley Neal versus Seth Bodnar, so we don't have any polls for Alme yet, but for the polls where it was Daines versus Riley Neal versus Seth Bodnar, showed a very interesting race. Daines versus Bodnar, when he was running as a Democrat, was 54-40, roughly about a 14-point lead. Now, for the Yes Every Kid poll from January, Daines had 43%, Riley Neal had 19%, Seth Bodnar had 15%, with still 20% undecided. In Steve Daines versus Riley Neal versus Seth Bodnar in the American Pulse and Research polling, it was also a very large lead. Daines at 52, Neal 25, and Bodnar 16. Daines versus Neal was a big, safe Republican win, 56-37. But Daines versus just Bodnar was 51-42, only a 9-point lead. So if Riley Neal or the Democrats, whoever it is, decide to drop out of the race and throw all their weight behind Seth Bodnar, there's a possibility this race could get very competitive and one where it falls under 15 points. with Neal and Bodnar both in the race, essentially it's splitting the anti-Republican vote, and the Republican Kurt Alme would probably win a first term in a safe matchup. So Montana is a Senate race that I am watching, and I am watching closely because what happens with the Democrats and Seth Bodnar is going to affect whether this race is competitive or not. I don't think Bodnar would win either way, to be honest, even if it's a head-to-head matchup. I think Alme would win, but it gives the Democrats, at very least, an opportunity to overperform in the state of Montana, which there is a very competitive House race, the 1st District, I believe it is, in Montana with Ryan Zink retiring. And if a very competitive Senate race takes place, it's possible that race can get more competitive on the House side as well. So those are 5 Senate races: South Carolina, Florida, Mississippi, Kansas, and Montana, that I expect will all be Republican wins. But the possibility of those races getting more competitive in 2026 certainly does exist. Thank you so much for watching this video. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you found it interesting. Make sure to leave a like and a comment down below what you think of this video and any other video topics or ideas or questions you may have for me going forward. For now, that is it. Thank you so much for watching. I hope to see you in a future video.